the final preliminary round of Genesis Oppong 2026. The motion for the round reads: this House prefers a world in which the global spread of major religions never occurred.
The motion demands that government reimagines a world without the global spread of major religions, such as Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. Let's assume these major religions are those with, say, 1 billion followers, but they are large enough to meet this criteria. To be able to properly do this and reimagine this world, like I'm behaving like God, creating a new world without the global spread of religion, to be able to do that and properly contextualize and conceptualize this new world, we would have to really, honestly agree and eliminate some inherent features of religion as we know them to be in status quo, which serve as the foundational basis for the global spread of the religion of those religions in the world. That means that those elements of religion that makes the global spread inevitable cannot exist in the world, and we must flag them out and show them. What do these features look like, these inevitable features? For instance, in Islam, there is this concept of jihad, or the concept of the holy war, that to an extent justifies an imposition of a war to convert people to Islam to a large extent. The Christians have this doctrine of the holy or the divine commission that encourages or actually requires them to go beyond the extent of their countries and their worlds and then convert people to the obedience of Christ and the word of God. That means that this element of religion, which propels the adherents of those religions to convert and change people and their fundamental belief or idea of who God is for them to suit what they believe God to be, has to be eliminated and does not really exist in our world. It is only by virtue of this absence that the global spread does not exist. And to a large extent, those things will not exist in our world. What then does that look like? It means that any part of religious doctrine that encourages or requires conversion of other people and societies to accept the doctrine of your religion and your doctrine does not exist in our world. This is the only means by which the global spread does not occur. Why is this something that is important? And how is this likely to make our world look like? It looks like, one, even if some spread of religion exists in our world, it won't be global because it is not because religion has commanded you to go and convert people, but people make your neighbors by seeing how you live your life. Questions by their own curiosity of the divine and religion, wants to live their life the way you do, and so inquires about your deity and all those things and decides to adopt your religion. What then does that look like? This means that a lot of the things that are associated as extremities of these concepts like jihad, like Christian extremism, that leads to crusades, that leads to the murder of lots of people, to the suppression of things like the Protestants as opposed to the Catholics. Things that led to a lot of atrocities in human history will be eliminated largely because of that, and we'll do a lot of analysis on how we eliminate a lot of the atrocities in the world without the existence or the spread or the global spread of major religions. That means that at best, even if there's some spread, it's contained within homogeneous communities or at best some regional blocks that understand themselves and were not imposed with some religion that's not indigenous to them. Before you move to the substantive matter on why distinctively such a world is better for the world, because it eliminates the most egregious atrocities like colonialism, like slavery, like a lot of the bad things that have happened in human history. Before we even go to that, why religion and why is that element not being a part of religion makes religion better and makes the world a better place at large? Recognize that for any society, any communal element, as part of their evolution as a civilization, they begin to encounter questions that probe spiritual curiosity. What that means is that people begin to question the reason for their existence when they satisfy their basic needs. Like, you know, Abraham Maslow, I'm not now going to teach social studies. But people begin to question things that inquire into their spiritual curiosity. Secondly, human beings are wired to look for ulterior powers to which they can credit their gains and even blame for loss, especially when they think those gains and losses are not within their control. Number three, they rely on this curiosity and interrogation to justify things and knowledge that they do not have yet, but things that they have seen, like phenomena like earthquakes and all those things that the cavemen experienced. They attributed to God because they couldn't explain them. This suggests that the search of religion is a search for answers for things that we do, or knowledge for things that we do not yet know. What then does that mean? That if people develop a religion, it is a pursuit of answers indigenous to their indigenous problems. That means that if Andrew and I within our community form a religion, it is in pursuit of answers to the indigenous problems we face within our society. What then does that mean? That indigenous formulation of ideas, guide whatever we do in our life subsequent to that. And that is why a lot of civilization is shaped by religion, because they deem religion to be the avenue where they will get answers that otherwise they will not get with their own human capacities. Why is this particularly important? This is important because the ability of a people to relate naturally to a religion that they have cultivated better facilitates the rate at which they're able to encounter life and self-actualize. On the alternative, or on the flip side, if a religion is imposed on a people, the time and the structures, the resources it takes to adapt to answers not indigenous to themselves, not indigenous to their reality, is a violence that is unjustified upon them, number one, and one that delays their self-actualization to a large extent. Yet, pure.
Why is it wrong for people to have options to opt out of their indigenous religions and go into another?
We are not against you opting out. What we are against is the violent imposition that comes with the global spread associated with the commands of religion that go forth and convert people. Why is that a problem, and why is that something we solve in our world? Without these extremities, remember, things like colonialism was facilitated by the fact that slavery were facilitated by the fact that we were able to be convinced that our traditional religion was savage, was something that was not dignifying because it was opposed to the Christian religion. It's as a result of this violence they did to our core belief system that they were able to override our autonomy, our identity, and therefore impose other political and sociological ideas on Africans to make colonialism and slavery thrive. Without these things, it is much more difficult to erode the personality and identity of people. What I have done is to give you a clear picture of what our world is likely to look like and why that must be the case. Outside of that, we are going to show you existentially why atrocities do not exist. Atrocities that do not exist, that exist on their world, do not exist in our world. Proud to win from Mochi.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Very welcome, Leader of Opposition.
I'm starting my speech now. So, panel, we are asked to imagine a world where global spread of major religions never occurred. So we are not imagining modern liberal democracies with secular institutions mostly in place. We are doing it with right? We are imagining a long sweep of human history where states are weak, borders are porous, literacy is low, and most importantly, people will never meet anyone outside their immediate community in and out of itself. And the human consequence of this is very important. You know why? Because in that specific world, the question is not what beliefs are more enlightened, but what systems actually let strangers live together without tearing each other apart. So the core clash in the debate is, did the global spread of religion make the world worse by imposing dogma and hierarchy, or did it solve coordination and moral problems that nothing else at that time plausibly could have done, right? That is what we are going to solve in the debate, right? Marfo and Prosper them want this because it is easy to focus on the harms religion has caused. Slavery, colonization, right? Once modern alternatives started to exist, right? And forget why religion became dominant in the first place. This is the mistake I'm here to correct in and out of itself, because in our world, religion spreads imperfectly, we concede, coercively, we concede, and normally brutally, we concede. But in government's world, religion never spreads at all, and humanity is left with something far more fragmented, more suspicious, and ultimately more violent. Let me be clear about what we are opposing from here. We are opposing a world like we oppose a world in which Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, whatever you like, right? Religions never scale beyond their local origins in and out of itself, right? Local belief systems still exist, right? Spirituality still exists. What never emerges is a shared moral and social language that links millions of people across geography in that specific lifetime in and out of itself. So in practice, what stays the same is human nature, right? Fear, greed, loyalty, violence, love, and the ambitions are still there. They are not going to disappear, right? What changes is the absence of any belief system capable of binding large groups of strangers together without constant force in and out of itself. This leads to my first argument that the global spread of religion created trust beyond kinship, and without it, societies remain trapped in permanent fragmentation in and out of itself. I'm coming. Here's the problem with government side, and the problem they are never going to solve, right? In pre-modern societies, trust does not arise naturally between strangers in and out of itself, right? People are wired to trust their family, their clan, their tribe, because betrayal is costly and enforcement is personal. When you remove a mechanism that expands trust, people do not become tolerant cosmopolitans, right? They retreat inwardly. Religion did something historically unprecedented. Thank you for doing that, right? Because it told people that moral rules apply even when no one was watching. It told them that strangers who shared faith were legible, predictable, and bound by the same moral constraints. This matters in this debate because trust is the foundation of everything else, right? Trade, diplomacy, migration, peace, in and out of itself, right? Oh, why did it stop? Right? Once a belief system spreads, right? Merchants can trade across regions without needing black ties, right? All they needed was religion. Oaths means something even without the police, right? Communities police themselves because violation carries social and spiritual costs in and out of itself. What you get in government world is that none of this is going to scale. Why? Because trust will collapse back into kin networks, right? Trade becomes smaller, riskier, and even more violent. Every interaction with outsiders requires coercion or constant proof that, oh, I'm part of you or something. But with religion, we're able to bind ourselves with something that even the lottery of birth, like it beats the lottery of birth, right? Because if I'm born in Ghana, all that I can tie myself with kinship and stuff like that. But religion, you can tie yourself with something greater that can be able to unite us in and out of itself. And let me restate this very simply for everyone to get. Religion did not spread because people were stupid. It spread because it solved the problem of how to live with strangers when the state could not protect you. That matters because the alternative is not freedom, it is fragmentation. That is why OG is not going to win. Yes.
First of all, things like contact with foreigners and trade will still happen outside of religion. That's why the Portuguese came to trade. And when they were legislating slavery, that's why before they brought religion.
Now, people can be able to be bound by something greater. Because when you get into these spaces, you have to prove that you are part of these individuals, right? In a world where you cannot prove without something that is greater, it becomes very, very difficult in and out of itself, right? Second thing is how global religions introduce moral universals that restrain cruelty across societies in and out of itself. Before universalist religions, right, morality was local, right? Your obligation were to your people, not to humanity in and out of itself. Outsiders could be enslaved, killed, or conquered without moral discomfort in and out of itself. Major religions did something radical at that specific time. They claimed that every soul mattered, the power had limits, that rulers answered to something beyond themselves. Yet, these principles were violated constantly, but they existed, and that existence mattered, right? Because once you say cruelty is wrong in principle, you create language for resistance. You give oppressed people moral standing, and you make reform possible from within the systems. That is how things like FGM and all those things were able to be solved, right? The government side would clearly say that, oh, religion entrenched hierarchy and all those kind of stuff. We agree, right? But hierarchy existed long before religion. Slavery existed long before religion, right? The government's saying that, oh, these things happen because religion did not place a ceiling on how far power can be able to justify itself, right? It made absolute dominant morally uncomfortable rather than morally neutral in and out of itself. And this is the crucial comparative you should understand, right? Secular human rights did not emerge from nothing. They were built on centuries of religious moral reasoning about dignity, obligation, and restraint. In government world, moral norms diverge widely across regions, right? There's no shared basis to condemn atrocities beyond local customs. Cruelty becomes harder to name, harder to challenge, and easier to excuse. So again, in simpler terms, religion did not eliminate evil, it made evil less defensible. And most importantly, their biggest it enforced things like colonialism, slavery. Panel understand, slavery way existed before religion even spread, right? People within Ghana were selling themselves before the Portuguese arrived in and out of it. So religion was not the major causal issue, right? So if that is the biggest problem, conflict and all of those kind of stuff, it's pre-existed religion. But what religion did is that it were able to give these people who were oppressed the moral power to be defensible in and out of it. So I've never been proud to stand for this.
All right, thank you very much. Leader of opposition, we call on the Deputy Prime Minister.
Fataw is going to have a hard time trying to save the case because Griffiths does a lot of things that does damage to the comparative that they want to establish within this debate. If the goal of everything that he argues is that you need to establish a system that allows for unification in some sense on the global scale that provides all the impacts that he has, I think then that if I can point out just one alternative that ensures that unification still exists, they have no impact. And part of the alternative is simple. Survival. I think when most individuals in societies collectivize on the basis of trying to find the best way that they can survive together or become stronger, what it inherently means in most instances is that it did not particularly have to come through the tool of the spreading of a major religion. It could just simply be that we agree to exist together. What is my example for this? The Mede-Persian Empire did not have a single religion. In fact, it existed with multiple different religions and allowed everybody within its empire to practice and believe in whatever God they wanted to believe in. But why did they exist as an empire and exist and collectivize together? Because they understood that they needed more trade networks and more to ensure their survival and the power of the state. What that means is they don't have an impact within this debate. But I needed to understand the unique unification that happens on their side that become problematic in the first harm I point out before I get into my extensions. For you to propagate an answer to a spiritual question, which is the idea of religion in itself, you have to often discredit the answers that other people have come together to come up with within their very religion for you to be considered the one that should be taken. So what that means is that it is a competition inherently with the spread. What that means is, for Christianity, when I come into Africa and I'm engaging with their Khan religion, specifically the worship of Antwa, it's not just that you must accept my religion. The way that I convince you, given that you've already held on to this thing, is to say that Antwa is bad, Antwa is a demon, and Antwa is going to ruin your life. And so you must inherently take the answers I have given you, which is Jesus Christ. These things become problematic because in the first instance, it undermines the beliefs of other people that they have uniquely formed on their own, based on their community, and the exercise of community agency, which particularly becomes bound to the formation of their identity in most instances. I think in principle, this wins us the debate firstly. But let me then get into the pragmatics that make our side incredibly important in a way that closing half can't come and say that they win this debate. I needed to understand a couple of things in the comparative that make these things clear. Marfo already points out to you the unique thing that we're often taking away from the structure of religion that exists to prevent the major spread or the globalization is inherently the conversion. But I need to understand the outcome of this. The outcome of this is that these religions don't become major. It's not necessarily they have 1 billion followers, but what often happens is that they remain community religions. What is the premise that makes this true? Marfo already points out to you that religion is an inevitable experience within human societies because oftentimes questions of where we come from, who we are, and what is going to happen after we die need to be answered, and people need, and these answers, in answering these questions, you inherently create religion. Here's the thing I need you to understand. There's no way we can falsify each answer anybody gives. The value of those answers are that they are answers in themselves and they provide some utility to these people in themselves. which means that the utility of religion existing in itself still exists for individuals in our world. But what is the unique structure of a community religion that inherently provides some benefits that I think is particularly important, because many people just answer themselves through answer it together as a community. Marfo already pointed out to you, it's unique to things around you. Proof of this, that is why African traditional religions will often have a god of a mountain, and if it's a community that doesn't have a mountain around them, they don't have a god of a mountain, because they're unique to the situations around them. But community religions do a number of things. One, they provide the ability to exist as an agnostic. Why is this true? At the very least, it is a practice of culture, and it does not have to sustain itself via structures like Sunday services, or all it needs you to do is to adhere to norms like probably don't fish on Tuesdays or come to one harvest festival or the other. What that means is that no one has an active incentive to consistently exist in structures and rituals. What is the comparative? In a system of global spreading, to keep your influence, you need to be a constant feature in the lives of the different individuals that you're engaging with. What that means is you have to be a part of their everyday life and everyday week. Sunday services, Wednesday midweeks, all these things you constantly remind them to understand that they are influencing your life, given there are multiple things people engage with in most instances. Why is existing as an agnostic an important issue? I think the journey to finding the answers for spirituality are answers that, in religion, in any religion that you exist, when you're engaging with the answers, because you cannot prove that they are true or not, oftentimes you're confronted with the fact that this is probably not true as an individual in the way you accept any religion that you are in. What that means is you often go through a season of cognitive dissonance. The way you're able to journey into accepting whether you want to believe in these things consistently, or the way that you want to be able to choose something else, is when there's a little cohesion to the decisions that you make. It exists on our side. Questions on opt-in and opt-out. I think migration, intermarrying, mixing of cultures is often what solves this problem on our side. That means that people can oftentimes experience these things. But the possibility is significantly reduced on their end, because everywhere you turn, there's a church, there's a mosque. Here's the thing, denominations will not provide that opt-in, opt-out for these people, because they don't question the existence of the religion in itself, or the existence of the God and the answers provides. It's just a difference in doctrine. But then here's the second thing that I want you to answer. The second thing that it answers is that community religion are less likely to be institutionalized in two ways. One, on doctrine. And before I get into this, I'm going to take closing. Opening. Moving on. On doctrine, I think the problem is for you to be able to spread, given that these religions often always, and every religion starts from a certain group of people in a particular place trying to answer a spiritual question that is particularly tailored to a community. If you want to spread it, you have to find a way to make it relevant to other people and other communities. Oftentimes, that means you have to streamline the messages and inherently find a way to put those messages in a way, in a way that you cannot, in a way, say that you do not want to agree with it. This is what we are all seeing, a unique messaging. That is why Christianity went through the Synod of Rome, the Council of Nicaea, to streamline all these things. The problem is that oftentimes there's still a problem of interpretation that will exist with these doctrines in most instances, given that it is built on history that is not particularly, that is not your particular history, or two, not specific to the community and the needs that particularly exist in that community. And oftentimes people have to extrapolate and try to add things to these things inherently to be able to make it meaningful to them, which is a hard battle to fight, because there will always be battles in between to defend the integrity of the doctrine and the fundamentalism of the doctrine, which leads to a lot of violence and breakaways and a lot of cognitive dissonance again for the individuals that exist within these places, which means that there's which is a lot of problem. Second way, it is institutionalized by organization. I think what you need to recognize is that power is more entrenched within these places, within these major global institutions, because when you have to set up global headquarters, global structures like the Pope to govern the global church that exists in most instances. The problem is, at the point where these religions become bad for people, and we can agree that community religions can become bad for people and do things like FGM, the people in their world cannot topple that religion because it's bigger and harder to engage. In our world, it's easier to topple it down. We are proud to be government.
Thank you very much, Deacon, for the fine speech. Welcome, and dear.
I'm going to start by responding specifically to DPM, because the first thing that he says is that there are several alternatives that allow for people to unite and engage with other people outside of religion. He says that the incentive of survival means that it is enough for people to want to unite. This is specifically false for a couple of reasons. Firstly, religious people are inherently pedantic and conservative, which probably means that irrespective of survival, they are still going to have reasons to believe that they shouldn't engage with other people. Take, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, where they believe that they shouldn't take blood from other people, even though it's something that is going to threaten their lives, which means that religious people will constantly have an incentive to engage other people from another religion. Secondly, they claim that in their world, it's a world where you're going to be limiting atrocities. there are a couple of reasons why this is untrue and not as persuasive as they claim. Firstly, the reasons why we had atrocities like the World War, the reasons why we had atrocities like the Great Crusade, etc., was simply because of the very nature of human greed. A significant reasons why we had the Holy Crusade was because we wanted to push Arabian lands and get the resources there. Religion was used just as a cover, which means that in their words, they will not be able to say, for example, that the unique mechanism that allow for atrocities to happen is through religion only, because there are several mechanisms and it's not only unique or tied to religion specifically. And therefore, removing the spread of religion doesn't necessarily mean that you are removing the possibility of these atrocities. Thirdly, they claim that in their world or in our world, religion is more likely to be coercive and that people would be forced to believe one particular religion or the other, or they have an incentive to spread their religion, to force their religions on other people. The reason why this is false is because, firstly, if that argumentation was true, then the entire world should be led by Christians or Muslims. Or for example, in Ghana, you shouldn't have people who are agnostics, who are atheists. It means that the possibility for spreading your religion without necessarily saying that other people should obey your religion, but ensuring that they just simply understand you is possible, and it's what exists in the status quo. The fact that we live in a world where Muslims and Christians can sit by side together and judge this room is specifically the reason why they're losing that debate. A couple of other things. PM says then that in their world, you increase the possibility for people to self-actualize because religion now becomes a search for meaning. Firstly, this is not something that is unique only to themselves, but more importantly, in their world, they restrict the possibility of varied meanings or varied expressions of meaning, because in their world, if it is community-based, you have no incentive to buy into the religion or buy into the sense of meaning from another religion, because it's also going to be community-based. If you are worshipping the stone goddess, you are unlikely to believe that someone else's tree goddess and the philosophy behind that is meaningful, which means you are stuck there. But secondly, they also ensure that minorities suffer, because if you are in the lottery of birth and you are born into this particular community, you have no incentive, you have no way to be able to opt out, you need to be able to find your own sense of meaning, because your community structures that meaning. You don't have the capacity to be able to express that meaning. That means that in their world, even if you buy the idea that they have the ability to be able to create meaning, that meaning is restrictive and harmful for minorities and for people. But thirdly, they are probably respond to the atrocities thing, right? But more importantly, the fact that you're not spreading religion doesn't mean that religion doesn't have an expectation upon you to practice those particular practices. What that means is that in their world, they cannot claim that individuals will not be able to move out, or like individuals will be able to explore outside of their own community-based religions. In their world, you are more likely to restrict people because your community members, the way that the religion is structured around you, even if you're not spreading it, is that you believe that you should practice it, which means that if you see other people and their other religious practices, you should hate those particular religions because your religion is unique, your religion is most important. Even if you're not spreading it, you inherently believe that your religion is inherently superior because that's what you were born with, that's what the culture around your religion is, and this is incredibly important. Note, this is something that's inherent in religion. So even if you're not spreading that religion, they believe that the religion is superior above others. It's incredibly important. I want to note a couple of things before I move on to my major cases, and this is important in terms of framing. First, major religions would exist on both sides of the world. What that means is that hierarchies, the messaging behind religions would still exist. The only difference is that in our world, we are spreading our message. In their world, they are not spreading their message. What is the implication of this? It means, for example, claims about hate would not make sense in today's debate. Why? Because in both worlds, you are not destroying or you are not eliminating the conservative nature of religion. But secondly, in both worlds, you are not eliminating the possible harms to minorities. The reason why we are significantly much better than theirs, even though we acknowledge all of these inherent problems, is that marginally, you increase the ability for people to be able to explore religion, to be able to explore and understand other people's religion. Because when you have an incentive to spread your religion, it means that you want other people to understand your religion and feel comfortable listening to your religion. What that means is, for example, you are more likely to build things like schools, you're more likely to provide things like scholarships to people, to be able to express your religion, to ensure that people are comfortable with your religion. This is why the Catholic Church is incredibly powerful and incredibly popular across the world, because they have an incentive to spread their religion, and the only way they can make their religion palatable is when they allow other people to see that there are benefits in joining this particular religion. This is something that doesn't exist on their side, because comparatively, you have no incentive to spread your religion, and if you have no incentive to spread your religion, then you believe that your religion is inherently powerful, it's inherently much superior to other people, because you don't have an incentive to engage other people, because you have no incentive to spread. Close it quickly.
The problem with your case is that even though there are multiple mechanisms and multiple things that will lead to these problems, why is it that conveniently religion has always been the easiest driver of these things? Accounts for why we should tolerate such an easy driver.
Yeah, but Again, firstly, even if religion is the easiest driver of the supposed atrocities, right, this is not something that they can eliminate on their side. But on their side, it becomes worse because it is localized, because it's now formed based of your community, it's now formed based of your culture. You cannot fight against your own community because you can't imagine a world where the religious culture of your own community is perverse or wrong. In our world, we allow people who are born as Muslims to recognize that there's a philosophy of Christians that they can believe and see as being impactful. In their world, they localize the harm. So yes, in our world, it's possible that people would still hate other people, but there's a marginal ability to understand other people and see that what they are saying is good and understandable. In their world, it is localized and it's much worse. The reason why this is important is because if it is localized, the powers or structures that hold and make religion conservative are much worse on their side because you don't have the ability to trade with other people, you don't have the ability to be able to engage them. They claim on their side that, like for example, we claim that on our side, our world is much better because we have the possibility of increasing things like globalization and the benefit that we get from globalization. Because in their world, if your culture or your religion is localized, it is tied to your culture, which means you have less of an incentive to trade with other cultures, less of an incentive to engage them because you see them as different, you see them as being alien. In our world, even if that is true, we increase the possibility that in the long term, you'll be able to engage with them and see them as being different, but people that you can systematically engage with. At the end of the day, yes, religion is not perfect. Yes, religion is conservative, but in which world allows the people to be able to move outside of that? Is it one way it is localized, or is it one way there are multiple opportunities we are proud to oppose?
Thank you very much for the fine speech here. We then go to the closing half. Member of government.
3, 2, 1. A lot of messiness within the debate. So first thing in this speech is to do general housekeeping in opening half. Secondly, I'll just prove why the spread led to all the oppression that opening government wants to achieve. And finally, explain why tolerance becomes better on our side, mechanizing better why, on the comparative, it beats open opposition, thereby it beats closing opposition because it seems tolerance is one of the most important things, or the most important things within the debate. First thing on general housekeeping, 2 points of framing. 1, I would note that Marfo already points out the comparative. I can credit that to him because most likely we have sectors of religion. So in Ghana, we still have our African traditional religion, and in other parts of the world, they have these localized sects of religion. But what I'm going to do is impact further by 1, that's a true mechanism, and 2, prove why that beats open opposition in the vast majority of instances, and prove why that is relevant for this role. First thing I would want to note is that these sectors of religion are always intertwined with culture. What is this to note? Culture already has certain rules and regulations that exist. And this is not because of the existence of a supernatural being, but it's because of how human beings interact with each other. So the reason why I know I need to trust you is because I understand through my own rationality that if I do not trust you, there are certain collective benefits that we cannot achieve. If we do not enforce certain rules like you shouldn't steal or you shouldn't do certain bad things, society as a collective cannot survive and cannot function. It means due to the collective rationality that human beings and society have, we create cultures, thereby creating codes of conduct for human beings to behave. What does this mean? All the fundamental underpinnings of religion that open opposition points about, trust, love, etc., are things that we still get on our side of the house, thereby mechanizing why we get that benefit and washing opening opposition out of this debate. This means their biggest claim on trust can still be gotten on any side of the debate. The reason why they couldn't sufficiently take them out from Andrew is because there was no clear way as to why the comparative mattered within the round. Second point of framing that we want to note, I think that the basic case of violent manners in which religion happened here ignores one important thing, because they are right that colonization would still have happened anyways. Why? Because of the quest for resources, etc., etc. What opening government doesn't point out is how religion is intertwined with these political factors, thereby driving political incentives to create all the benefits that they want on their side of the house. And I'm going to mechanize that in a couple of seconds. But why is this then important to point out before we get into the case? 1, it mechanizes better why opening government's case is much more likely. Because if we intuitively buy the response that colonization exists, it means opening governments cannot have their case. But the reason why we would intuitively want to buy that is because from an objective standpoint, it's true that colonization would have existed. So that the question then is, why is it that religion drove all these political incentives in the first place? One, what does the global spread look like? I would want to note that the global spread and the main rhetoric behind the global spread was to make sure that a particular religion was dominant. What did this mean? For you to be able to make the religion dominant, you don't get up and pray. You need to be able to take control of certain things within the status quo. How do you do that? Locally within your country, first of all, you need to gain political power within members of the country. How does this work? First thing, that a lot of these powers, political parties formed prior. Why? Because these identities of religion that they used to form their parties made sure that they had a first mover advantage. So for example, the Islamic coalition party in Iran was one of the first parties to be formed. It was one of the most powerful parties because it had a first mover advantage within the political sphere. What did this mean? It shaped people's perception of what is normal within the status quo. What does this mean? When you intertwine religion with politics, what it does is that it clouds rationality and it makes people immediately flock to politics. Why? And that's why a lot of people use religious rhetoric to make sure that they gain a lot of people on their side of the house. Particularly because they understand the relevance of religion. What religion does is that it makes something normal. The reason why this is important is because more and more people flock to these political parties simply because they saw them as the norm and simply because they saw them as really important. But the second way in which they did this was that a lot of caliphs, etc., used their fellow other people within power and had so many collaborations with them. That's why in Iran there were several coalition parties, particularly because of the collaboration between elites within power who had one goal of of spreading religion, particularly because they were aligned religiously. What this meant is that there was a concentration of political power within these sectors such that they were able to gain more and more political capital to do a lot of the things that Kattah says that they want to do. For example, being able to put a lot of money or capital or resources into conducting this mass spread. Because note that religion could not just have gotten up and said that we are going to take control over certain resources. Particularly because you needed so much resources. So if you wanted to do the spread on the scale that Kattah says, what you had to do is that you had to gain capital. The way to gain capital is by gaining political capital and advantage. The second way in which they did this was that they weaponized the masses and manipulated them to make sure that they bought into their ideologies. How did this happen? Before I get into the mechanisms of how people bought the CS.
Yeah, so Pano, ask yourself this. If religion didn't want to spread, would the United States still have invaded Iraq and Libya for their oil reserves? If yes, then religion is never the primary driver for all of these bad things.
No, that is based off the assumption that I pointed out in open government. My case is mechanized uniquely why religion drove political incentives to do that. Do not strawman. The second thing here was the way they were able to uniquely do this was a couple of things. One, they were able to weaponize the idea of a supernatural being. What this meant was that people flocked to religion and there are political incentives because they tied political incentives to the supernatural. So the reason why we need to engage in a lot of the things that they say in open government is simply because God exists. And they were able to weaponize this narrative. What did this do? One, it pushed out a lot of political opposition, so they were not able to gain a lot of power. Secondly, a lot of the electoral bases flocked to them simply because they had this narrative in their head. Finally, on tolerance, why is it that religious tolerance intolerance is something that happens within the status quo? That's because of the perception that what is the norm is what is dominant. The reason why most of us do not value African traditional religions and we think that they are barbaric is not because God told us to do so, but it's because our perception of what is normal has been influenced by the dominance of such religion. That's why most Christians will want to say, because they will say that, the reason why it's normal to be a Christian is because more and more people are doing that. What this means is that it uniquely mechanizes why tolerance is better on our side of the house. But even if that's not the case, a lot of the things we point out, the violence and the mass destruction that would have happened uniquely because religion had driven political incentives. Proud to win from closing government.
Thank you very much, Member of Government. Now welcome the Member of Oppong.
I'm going to start the debate by talking about things that big religion looks like that no one has spoken about. So globalized religion looks like a couple of things. They are big, like I already said, but most importantly, they've also been localized to an extent. That means a couple of things. Looks like a couple of things. One, adaptation of saints in local context, translation of dogma, and connection of religion to important parts of the life of the people in the jurisdiction. I'm providing this clarity for a couple of reasons, because I'm going to engage some things in the opening half that like claim that these kinds of religions have absolutely no local versions etc. I think that is simply not true, and that can't be the debate. Second thing, in terms of clarity, everybody in this debate agrees that religion will exist anyway. And the religion will exist anyway for a couple of reasons. One, escapism. People want to find answers, and people want to feel something. Because people want to feel something, people want to find answers, in this debate, the comparative has become global religions v community-based religions, and that is the debate that we must engage. But the other thing that we also need to understand is that religion requires a few things, and these things are things that exist in both types of religion. Because they point out that evangelism, the idea that a religion has to be bigger or better than the others, is something that exists with global religions, and that's fine. Here's the thing. With every religion comes the suspension of belief, the creation of rules and regulations, and power structures like hierarchies. The only way you end up being a good religious person, whether it is a global religion or a community religion, is for you to respect all of these things. You have to suspend your belief, you have to actively engage in the rules and regulations of the religion, and you also have to deal with the power structures of the religion. Very important debate, stuff that we need to understand in this round. First off, especially because this is being recorded, I regret all the deaths that have happened because of extremism. Millions have died, and that's a sad issue. But I think the worst form of death are the lives we lost in front of the altar, and the souls that have perished because of their spiritual fathers and their spiritual mothers. What this looks like is the fact that because the vast majority of people would be religious in both worlds, the biggest issue is not the people that die as a result of the spread, but the people that die as a result of the structures of the religion they belong to and what that looks like for these individuals. They don't have any mechanisms on this. They don't say the same thing. They are writing because this is definitely different from the way they set up their case. A couple of things then is important in this debate. See, the worst deaths happen inside religions, not even outside the religions in and of themselves. And what does this look like? I think Dela says something that I completely disagree with. Some things are simply just not normal. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In African religion at a certain point, people were doing human sacrifices. People were actively giving out their daughters to pay for sins. People were not taking their kids to school and giving them out as slaves to gods as a result of the fact that they believe in these gods and they support these gods. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to mention any specific religion or any specific part of the country. What this inherently means is that there's a possibility for religion to make it impossible for individuals to self-actualize and have a good life. But I don't dispute the fact that these things also exist on our side. Because what this looks like is people actively giving out all their money to pastors, etc. And I think that is equally bad. The conversation then becomes, in what world do we have more scrutiny, and in what world are we more likely to counter these things? And I think that is where the debate begins. So what does this then look like? A couple of things. A bigger spread means bigger audience and more scrutiny. Why? Because if there are more people who are engaging in the religion, the likelihood that there's going to be a conversation about these practices is high. But also recognize the way religion exists and how the power structures engage with the individuals. The more proximate you are to your spiritual father and your spiritual mother, the less the likelihood for you to do things like contest their ideas and actively go against them. You are in the presence of power, you enjoy the power, you are being told you are going to heaven because you honor your mother and father in the Lord, you call them daddy, and that is why you are a great person. What you are more likely to have on our side is because of the spread, the engagement of these religions goes beyond the direct environment of influence of these individuals. What that looks like is the Anglican Church in England can say something and make a decree. The Anglican Church in Ghana can engage it differently, and individuals in Ghana who are not directly engaging the Anglican Church through the eyes of the Anglican Church in and of itself in England can also have a different opinion. Even not for anything at all. There's also institutionalization. This looks like things like theology. This looks like things like research that actively happens as a result of the spread. Because if it is true that religion has become such an important part of our lives and it influences things like politics, then there's a need for things like studying the religion. Because recognize the comparative. It is not that religion will not exist on their side or religion will not exist on our side. It it is that religion would exist on both sides, but in their world it is more localized, there's less scrutiny, and there isn't a lot of conversation happening because these things are happening in echo chambers and in pockets of society. On our side, we get better feminism on our side because then women in the church can rise up and speak against the issues. On their side, it is almost impossible. I'll take a few while.
The problem with this case is that the audience is not true that they are always critics because as much
we agree. I agree with you, Prosper. I agree with you. My time is going. I agree with you. See, the audience are not always going to be critics. We don't dispute that. The likelihood that we have critics on our side increases by the sheer amount of individuals that you have to engage with and the fact that they are not proximate to the religious power or they are not in the proximity of the religious power in most instances. That is the debate. Like, I get it that it seems like a very simple case, but that's the conversation. Because I agree with them that people have died because of extremism. I don't disagree. But think about the number of people whose dreams have died because their religion says they cannot be who they want to be. Whose dreams have died because they've given all their lives to a religion and to a God that they'll never see or they may see. I don't know. But the point here is that because of the influence religion is going to have on all of us, considering the fact that on both sides, religion will still exist, we need to be able to have big religions that allow us to engage religion as the highest level and have a level of scrutiny that is important. Because recognize what this looks like. It looks like the active attempt for people to engage various religions. I'm not going to give specific examples, right? And try to deal with the excesses that these religions have. What happens on their side is you first off do not really know the excesses in most instances because these things are happening in echo chambers, and because there's no spread, because that's their engagement and their mechanism, you don't even know the tenets of the religions that exist in other places. The best thing that you can see is the things that they show you. What they do when they go behind closed doors is not great. We can have a black market for everything. We simply cannot have a black market for religion. It's been a good day to oppose.
Alright, thank you very much, member of welcome the government.
Yeah, I forgot to say this. By the way, jihad does not mean holy war. Please.
Since it's been recorded, disclaimer. I'm currently dating a pagan, so my religious views are not particularly the most popular. So forgive me if I say things that are not really sweet. I like that I'm dating a pagan woman. Because every time I speak to her, I ask her questions about her religion. Because the reason I am inclined to critique her religion is because her religion is different. Critique is more present when there is difference. When there is similarity, there is less likelihood of critique. What this means is that big religion is less criticized because more people are similar in those spaces, and as such, they are less likely to question one another. Why this is important is because this inherently means that CO does not have a case. I would be more brutal in my responses to them when I engage them. I just think intuitively, commonsensically, it does not fly within the debate. We'll get to that in the crux of the debate. This then means, I'm not one of those people that's going to come and tell you that this side plays over this side or this, but I don't care. What I care about is that I win. I'm going to engage why our case is the most logically consistent and realistic depiction of how this world will look like, and show you why universally we win the debate. I'll start with our case and why it's important. Because note, you need to understand that there are multiple things that influence big cultural shifts and big historical shifts. It is unfair for OG to claim it is only religion that led to all the things that happened. But conversely, it is also unfair for these guys to claim that religion had no hand in it and religion did not particularly participate. The closest conversation that particularly engages this realistically is that religion did have a hand in it, but in the absence of religion, would it have been done cleaner? Would it have been easier for us to create a new world order that would be more reasonable for us to form the metrics of society around? And that is what we argue from our side. We start by showing you why the spread makes religion too big to handle and too difficult for us to engage with. Because the spread does not go like out of the blue.
It starts from the baseline. It means it captures every other fraction of society in ways in which you cannot particularly control. That's why it talks to you about the political networks that are particularly capitulated in that regard. This is upstream to what these guys talk about, because they just say jihad. And I'm glad they were educated that jihad does not mean holy war, because I don't think that thing really makes sense. Like, there are multiple other things that go on. It is more structural than one man wakes up and says, oh, the Quran says jihad. I don't think people are that dumb. It behaves in a manner in which that spread starts from the bottom, captures them, and essentially captures other fragments of society. We think the bigger you get, the harder it is to contest the fact that you are being stupid. And that's the problem we have, that big religion is more difficult to critique, which directly engages these guys, and that is where we win the debate. Let's then engage how we beat opening government. Summarily, their case is religion has caused a lot of problems, and because of these problems, it is going to be a bad idea for us to not prefer a world where it wasn't spread and religion wasn't this big. The problem again is that even in the absence of religion, these problems most likely would have existed. I don't think that's the most important conversation within the debate. The issue, however, is that conversely, OO has three positive material that they present. The first is the conversation around trust. They say religion creates the basis upon which we create trust, and this is foundational to society's operation in that regard. The first problem is there would be religion on our side equally. The problem is those religious groups and that religion is not particularly going to be universally spread and not going to be big. The problem with their case then is they need to show why, absent of the spread, people cannot build trust off the back of independent religion. I'll show you why it is possible. One, the most important spread exists in microcosms. So within Ghana itself, there must be some level of consistency. Since we argue on a bench unilaterally that there is going to be internally consistent religion, we think there would be trust interactionally between myself and Jamaluddin, even though we both worship Nyame and he doesn't worship Allah and I don't worship Buddha. I think what that means inherently is that there is going to be still some level of trust and some level of operationalism. Where their delta comes is trans-border trust. They think that we will not be able to have trust with people outside of our kin, which is essentially what they say. I don't think this makes sense. The reason why that doesn't make sense is because you will still need certain things from people outside of your space, and they will still need certain things from you. What this means is that you most likely have your survival and your actualization contingent on articles that are extrinsic to your local environment, and that's going to happen on the other side too. What that means then is because they know that they need my gold, and because I know that I need their timber, essentially trade is going to force us to comply and interact trans-borderly. What that means then is that trust is not relevant within this debate. It will naturally form extrinsic of a broad religion. But beyond that, the reason why this is very intuitive is because Iran trades with a lot of non-Islamist and non-Muslim countries. I don't think that that's the delta within the debate. That's not where things happen. But before I continue, I'll take opening then closing.
Yeah, so they ignore the way that religions are heavily pedantic. What that means is that even in their world, if trade is allowed, it's still going to be limited. It's still going to be based on the idea.
Sure, I'm going to engage why it's going to spread.
So I love the fact that you point out the connection between religion and culture. We think religion has the same, culture has the same problems that could make things worse. Pride, nationalism.
Okay, great. I'm going to engage that equally. Let's tell these guys, I do not think that trust is going to be on a low level, because to a huge extent, I really enjoy certain food that I can't get in Ghana. What that means is that my very existence and my very happiness is contingent on things I have to import from other countries. As such, I'm still going to have to interact with them. I think trade foundationally is tied to our happiness and our ability to self-express and be particularly actualized. It's still going to be high in that regard. These guys say things like culture would exist. The problem is, right now in status quo, culture and nationalism exist alongside big religion. On our side, we might have one big problem. On their side, they have two. Worst of, those two problems often get intertwined. That is why Trump uses both religious and nationalistic rhetoric. In our world, there would be a Trump. At best, he only uses nationalistic rhetoric, but we don't think nationalistic rhetoric is as impository as religious rhetoric. Why? I can still question the state. I cannot question God, because God is my creator, and when I die, I'll go back to him. The imposition of religion is much more heavier than the imposition position of the state, because the state only controls when I am alive. God controls when I die. It's a bigger harm than whatever the alternatives could particularly present. Commonsensically, we think we win this debate on every single level fairly. Very proud to break first, I think.
Thank you very much for the speech. Very welcome, the Chief Whip here.
Starting off in the same spirit as Prosper, where there is no spread, there is no real change. Because religion fundamentally becomes the culture and identity of people, and it becomes directly tied to who these people are intrinsically. This is not to say that in their world or in our world, religion isn't tied to people's identity. It's just that in our world, there's the capacity to decouple it for a number of reasons. There are a number of things which have already been said, but simply the fact that even in status quo right now, there's active conversation about how these religions could potentially be bad and the impact these religions have had on individuals. Things which could only happen because of the spread, number one, but number two, because of the decoupling of these people or these religions from the people on the ground. Elisha's example about the Anglican Church and how when the Anglican Church tells you something in England, because you live in Ghana within different contexts, you actually leave these things out in a different way. But that means that the Anglican Church isn't too directly tied to your culture in and of itself. But the second thing which is really important is that when you think about it, the dialogue which exists really doesn't actually lead to any real change. Let's use the example he gives us of his pagan girlfriend. In the best case scenario, all he does is that he asks his pagan girlfriend about the things she does. But because the religion is directly tied to his culture, he isn't going to necessarily change. So for example, if he was a practitioner of the African traditional religion, he's just going to hear about what the pagans do. He's not going to change the things in the African traditional religion which are problematic, like having to give out your child to the god because you have to pay appeasement to the god, all of those things. What that means that all the impacts he runs don't necessarily engage with Elisha's argumentation about how the structures of these religions see on themselves are extremely detrimental and extremely hurt individuals. But going back to the culture, the fact that the culture can cause all of these things, i.e. the aestheticization of passion, i.e. the nationalistic tendencies, means that all the conversations they have about atrocities, all of those things are actually not comparative. The only thing which really matters is that we actually engage a world where the individuals, me and you who engage in the religions, are at least given significantly better options and the capacity to call out religions which constantly oppress us. Elisha's argumentation is the most proximate to get to these things. Engaging atrocities and why atrocities will continue to exist. You must know that they point out to you multiple reasons why religion is bad. The problem is, if they agree that religion is bad, they must also agree that religion continues to exist in their world. It's within the motion. What that means is that because religion continues to exist, there's the propensity for these things to happen. Human beings can be number one, cynical, but number two, ingenuitive in the capacity to produce evil upon human beings. What does this look like? Instead of saying that we must spread our religion to the Middle East, they'll say God told us that we must take out these individuals in the Middle East because it is the will of God, and people continue to believe because the religion exists. So instead of the English church, instead of the Anglicans or whichever, or the Catholics saying that we are going to spread our word to the Middle East, they can simply say God said we should take over the Middle East because that's where Jerusalem is and it's the will of God. The capacity for evil still exists. Three examples of this: religions which didn't proselytize but still eventually did some certain level of harm. The Vikings don't necessarily spread their word to you, but because it's within their culture and it's directly tied to their identity to a certain capacity, they still enacted violence on people because their culture required them to do this because of the kind of environments they grew up with. Incans and how they did human sacrifices and how they harvested human heads for their god means that they can still produce atrocities regardless of whether they have to proselytize or spread their word. We think that conversation can be won on their side. There's a capacity for harm to exist on both sides. Why Elisha's argumentation is therefore the most relevant and most important before that opening.
CO is non-comparative. The extent of coercion exists on both sides, and he concedes, which means that it is possible for communities to question as well. Socrates, Anaximander, Thales, they said, fuck the Greek gods. These things happen. It's far worse in their world because there's reinforcement, because it's bigger.
Pano, I come to introduce you to a new concept, marginal utility. Our world is really simple because our world makes it more likely that we can fight against these people on a larger scale. There's the Anglican, there's the whole of Christianity with like 2 billion people in it, and we have more people coming up and saying that Christianity can be a problem. The comparative in their world is that African traditional religion must have people within the African traditional religion fighting up against the specific cultures without necessarily being capable of collectivizing among themselves to fight up against the collective harms of religion, like across the whole of society and so. We think that the impact of this is quite simple. Elisha does a lot of this, right? He talks about how, number one, the fact that the spread of this religion has happened and these religions are so big has given us a capacity to institutionalize our ability to fight against them. It analyzes how these things work, how due to specific context which exists, which is all everyone agrees to, people always have an incentive to fight for their specific needs within your soul. What I mean is that in status quo, you can, number one, adapt these things to benefit yourself most meaningfully. But number two, it means that at any point in time, you can actively do research about the impact of these things on people's lives. It means that if you are a feminist and you care about women within your society, you can actively fight against it and point out how religion has actively hurt individuals and that the religious context which exists in this place are detrimental. Comparatively, it is significantly harder to do because, number one, people's religions are now directly tied to who they are. Fighting against them is fighting against the state inherently. It's fighting against the whole of Ghana because Ghana as a whole believes in something and you yourself think that that thing doesn't matter. So instead of widowhood drive should be stopped, people come against you collectively as the country of Ghana because coming against you as the country of Ghana because you're coming against the country of Ghana of itself and that's your whole identity of itself. Second thing which is really important, the conversation about how minorities can get a certain amount of consistent call-outs and opt-outs because of the options which exist in status quo, right? We think that at any point in time, religion being tightly coupled to identity means that if nothing at all, it's significantly more beneficial for us as a collective and for individuals. And here's why. I think that if nothing at all, religion being culture is still very dangerous in their world, and it's quite simple. We think that religion being culture creates an active incentive for people to nationalize themselves and to create barriers around themselves to stop people from actively infiltrating and engaging them before that closing.
The problem on this side is that he says on our side we have religion in Ghana, on the other side we have religion in Ghana, USA, freaking Uganda. It's a greater aggregation, that's a greater harm. If marginal utility is their problem, they create more marginal harm because now the USA backs fucking Israel.
You see, I don't know, Prosper is big. Don't let him insult your intelligence. It's really very simple. If you, as a Muslim in Ghana, a lot of Muslims in Ghana don't even wear the hijab. Because what? We have our own localized context where people can at least have these conversations. The problem is people are more likely to hold on to their ideals more strongly in a world where there's no spread. Meanwhile, in a world where there's spread, people can at least assimilate, learn new things, and then change themselves to become significantly better. Something which is more proximate in our world, more likely. If nothing at all, I think that on sheer pragmatics, on just pragmatics, Elisha's argumentation is really important for a very simple reason. Elisha argues to you that the people are most likely to get, because people will die on this world, the people are most likely to get are the average individuals, you and me, who are stuck inside the religion and probably have to live our whole lives giving ourselves out to God. Elisha argues to you that the best side is a world where there's a spread, because in a world where there's a spread, there's a capacity for me to look at other things and to fight back against a religion to constantly oppress me. In their world, you're stuck within your own small circle where you're constantly forced to live a certain way. In our world, you get an opt-out mechanism, you fight against oppressors, you create a world where you can live more meaningfully, you get self-actualization. No better side to self-actualization than closing opposition. Here.